All right, viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good day and welcome to another interesting episode of Global Arena on my YouTube channel, Global Arena TV. I'm your host, Umar Isa Dandago. As you know, this is an important and significant moment, not just in the United States of America, well, of course, a country's politics that we are covering, we have already started covering, but its politics is significant in other parts of the world. As somebody says, when America sneezes, the world catches cold, which means an American issue affects not just the United States of America and its immediate allies or immediate neighbors, but also affects other countries. With me today on the show, I have got Professor Jeff Kelly Lowenstein from Grand Valley State University, also the founder of CCIJ, Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for always honoring my invitation.
Thank you, Omar. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. Congratulations again on your recent graduation and now your ambitious effort to establish multiple radio and YouTube shows. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And from Houston, Texas, I have got Dr. Abdulaziz Tijani Bako, who is a Facebook celebrity. I forgot to say this to Professor Kelly. He's known all over Facebook here in Nigeria as a critic, an analyst, and also public affairs commentator. He's a medical doctor and a researcher based in Texas. Dr. Abdulaziz Tijani Bako, thank you very much indeed for coming back on the show. You're also a friend of the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome. Professor, let me start with you. A lot of things have happened for the past 1 week or 10 days. First of all, starting with the assassination attempt of Donald John Trump, which is seen by a lot of people as something heavily significant in the modern history of the United States of America. Briefly, do you think his assassination could generate and garner a lot of sympathy of the Americans, thereby making it one of the factors, if not the sole factor, for the Americans to re-elect him, to vote for him again into the Oval Office?
Well, thanks for the question, Umar. And I guess the answer is ultimately we don't know yet, but it certainly seems that initially, especially among supporters of former President Trump, there was a very strong response both to the fact that he almost, as you said, he almost got killed. When he was so close, as you saw, he moved his head and he still got shot in the ears. So it really was very close to his getting killed. The way that he responded by coming up and then pumping his fist and yelling, "Fight, fight, fight," and the American flag was in the background. And then even as you saw at last week's Republican National Convention, he was wearing a plaster on his ear, but many of the supporters were also wearing a plaster on his ears. So for critics of the Republican side who feel that he has kind of too much control over the party, they say, well, this is messianic and he has too much influence and so on. On the other side, some people would say that he's always had a very strong, visceral, emotional connection with the people who support him, and that for some people, that only is stronger in the response that he made to the assassination and how he's handled afterwards. If you saw the acceptance speech that he gave at his nomination, he was quite somber at the beginning and talking a tone of unity, but then quite quickly got into insulting his President Trump or not. You often expect him to do, and he did those things. So I think it's ultimately it's hard to tell, but certainly for some people who support him, it was a very powerful moment.
Yeah, of course. So in a simple term, it's unpredictable. It's not yet clear that that assassination attempt could make people sympathize with him and vote for him, right? To get things clear.
Yeah, it's hard to know for sure yet, but certainly initially for some people, there was very strong support. And as you said, it's a very serious moment when any major political candidate is attempted to be assassinated. So it prompted some somber reflection about that. And you may be familiar with this, but former President Roosevelt was another candidate who was shot, then continued campaigning, and he was, it's called the Bull Moose Party and so on. So there were those kind of allusions to the nation's history and to the strong response that President Roosevelt made and other people putting it in that light. So whether that translates to votes, that's always a tough thing to predict at the moment. But certainly initially there seemed to be a strong response by some people in favor of how he responded to the shooting.
All right. Hopefully later I will ask you why is it that Donald Trump is seen as somebody who is now controlling the GOP? It's no longer now the party of Ronald Reagan. It's now the party of Donald Trump. But that would be later. Abdulaziz Tijanbako, if you can come in. There was a time when we tried to talk to you about the issue of gun violence a few months back. What could you say? Unfortunately, we had a technical issue. What could you briefly say to us about your experience of gun violence in the United States of America?
Well, I am thankful to God that I have not been in any situation close to gun violence, any a first-hand experience of it. But I do really care about the issue. I think it's a very, very important issue. It is also something that is scary even about, that you can go to a grocery store and then all of a sudden things are going normally, and then all of a sudden you realize that there's someone with a gun, or whether it's in school, whether it's in a grocery store or wherever. You can never, you can not discount or discount the fact that gun-related violence could occur. So that's really scary. And then also, it's a hugely political issue. It's something that people have not come to terms with a common idea of how to treat or how to take care of the problem. So I think my experience is that there's a lot of very, very strong support for it in one part of the in one of part of the population, and there's a huge opposition to that kind of circumstance where everyone can purchase it. Last few days, I have seen actually like a grocery store where they have a vending machine for bullets. You can just go to the vending machine and just buy ammunition. That's crazy. It's crazy to think about as a Nigerian, where it's very difficult to own a gun, and I think it's also crazy to think about for many people from many parts of the group. So I think that's just my take on it. I don't think it's something that could easily be solved.
Okay, yeah, Professor, if I come back to you. Okay, right now, in Nigeria, there are a lot of people who don't know between Republican and Democrat who are opposed to gun ownership and who are in favor of the gun ownership. If you could briefly explain to us between the two major parties, who opposes and who supports the gun ownership? Second Amendment.
Yeah, no, thanks, Umar, and thank you, Dr. Abdulaziz. So I would say that on the whole, the first thing to note is that the right to bear arms is enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which was passed shortly after the Constitution was ratified in the late 1700s. There was what was called the Bill of Rights, and so there were 10 amendments added to the Constitution. So the second one is the right to bear arms. And I just mentioned that because there is different kinds of gun ownership within the United States. There's recreational gun ownership, there's sporting gun ownership, and then there's gun ownership for the kind of thing that we saw with the assassination attempt of former President Trump. On the whole, at the federal level, the Republican Party tends to be very, very strongly against the legislative basis for their opinion. And I would imagine that some of your viewers and listeners have seen that there have been many, many school shootings in the United States and mass shootings. So at the state level, at both Democratic-controlled and Republican-controlled states, there have been different types of measures against or for controlling some of the passing some of the gun control measures. But on the whole, Republican legislatures, in part because of the influence of the NRA, National Rifle Association, tend to be quite opposed to the imposition of the state and that kind of legislation. And it's been interesting because they've been quite quiet even since the assassination attempt on former President Trump. I agree with Dr. Abdulaziz that it's been a problem, really a public health issue in our country for a long time. And there's been very hard, particularly at the federal level, to find agreement. There have been quite a few state level measures passed, but the weapons are very powerful and there's a strong effort against them, largely on the Republican side, I would say. I hope that answers the question.
All right. To get things clear, the Republicans are in favor of gun ownership, while the Democrats are opposed to gun ownership, because Kamala Harris said, was it yesterday in her first public speech campaign after being endorsed by Joe Biden, that when she is voted, she would implement gun control, something like that, right?
Yeah, well, but I thank you, Omar, and for that clarifying question. I'd say there's a difference between being opposed to gun ownership and then gun control. So as Dr. Abdulaziz was just sharing with us, in different parts of the country, you can go in and like buy some candy and then also buy bullets. That it's that easy to have that access depending on the state. So people who are for gun control are not necessarily saying there can't be any guns. They're just saying there need to be some rules and policies, background checks, ages. There's different types of measures that are suggested, but it's not quite as stark as one is in favor, one is opposed.
Okay, let's now move on to Joe Biden. Last Sunday, 2 days ago, because we are recording on Tuesday, the 23rd of July, Sunday, the 21st of July, happened to be the day when Joe Biden broke the news that he would no longer be running for office in November's election of 2024. And thereby, a few minutes, like 26 minutes after that, he put out a tweet endorsing Kamala Harris. Abdulaziz Tijjani, did it come to you as a surprise that Joe Biden had to heed to the pressure that that started to be mounting on him?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's a surprising thing. I think the level of pressure has been tremendous from various parts of the Democratic Party. And I think many people, a huge amount of people, were really suggesting to Joe Biden he should recuse himself, if you will, and just give up the idea of contesting the presidency. I think it was a very patriotic move by Joe Biden. I cannot imagine something like that happening in Nigeria, my country. because given the fact that there are a lot of health issues around his ability to lead the country, that's an important thing. Many people would not think about the fact that it is possible that their health is deteriorating and they're not able to accomplish the functions of a president, especially the presidency of the United States, which requires a huge amount of commitment and a huge amount of participation. It's something that requires someone to be fully functional to be able to lead the country. So it is a very patriotic move, I guess, for him to step down and also to show to the people and lead by example.
Yeah,
that when
he has done this,
it is clear to him that,
and as he said, he has done this for the good of the party and for the good of the country. And this is an important lesson that our leaders in Africa, especially Nigeria, should learn, right?
Yes, definitely. I think I was moved by that sacrifice. It's a huge sacrifice.
And would you envisage, would you predict something like this from our leaders?
As I have mentioned in the beginning, I do not think that there would be any person that I can think of in Nigeria among the big politicians that we know of who could make these kinds of sacrifices. There has been situations where some of these candidates, they have seen that, okay, they're not capable of winning alone, so they have made some partnerships and they have given up their ambitions. But it's mainly because it is very clear to them that they are not going to get to the presidency in a small party. So rather than just going in a small party and contesting and losing, then they join hands with politicians from the big parties. But it's almost impossible for someone, leading as the leading candidate of a big political party to all of a sudden decide that he's not going to continue because of something related to his health or some other thing. So I don't think that.
Yes,
I can't imagine that happening in Nigeria.
Yeah, sure. Professor Kelly, it seems like Kamala Harris has already or will get will get the nomination depending on the version that you take, unopposed. Is this sort of a way paved by Joe Biden for her to become the future president of the United States of America in order to make a history by becoming the very first woman to occupy the Oval Office and by becoming the very first woman of color to occupy the Oval Office? Do you think that a way has been paved for
her? Yeah, thank you for the question, Umar. And I would say, I think President Biden and Vice President Harris certainly hope so, that the way has been paved. And as you mentioned, President Biden broke the news on X that he was not planning to continue with his campaign, and then about less than half an hour later, fully endorsed Vice President Harris and said it was the best decision he's made. And then she very quickly, there was some talk initially about kind of an open convention, but very quickly, even continuing today with Senator Schumer and Representative Jeffries giving their endorsement, she has secured enough delegates to win the nomination in Chicago in less than a month. So that's just a very quick transition. As you saw, the donations that came in were more than $80 million in 24 hours. I believe that's a record donation for a single day. So there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm, I think, both for Vice President Harris as potentially this historical candidate on a number of different levels, first woman, first South Asian presidential candidate at that level, and then first woman of color. So there's a lot of energy there. There also is a tremendous amount of anxiety within the Democratic Party, which led to that pressure that Dr. Abdulaziz was referring to, that was brought to bear on President Biden after that very disastrous first debate with former President Trump. And so I think part of it is seeing the pathway for Vice President Harris to make history. Part of it is a perception of the threat that Donald Trump arguably represents to democracy. And part of it is the relief at having a next direction after this very uncertain period and almost a sense of impending doom after the debate and the fallout in the subsequent weeks.
Yeah, definitely. One thing you've talked about, Professor Kelly, about endorsement from other high-profile Democratic Party's members, but two important figures have not endorsed her yet: Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama. Has not yet endorsed her. He only praised the Joe Biden's move as an honorable thing, as something like that. Do you think it's a problem? Because there's a guy who could be termed as a conspiracy theorist who made a video on YouTube suggesting that something is wrong, that somebody who happened to be the very first African-American president of the United States has not yet endorsed the first African-American.
I have a question here. There's been a ton of things that's been happening as of late. You know, if you've been following my channel, I post a lot of things that's going on in the world, you know, degenerate behavior, whether it be among black people or whether it be among white people. But I do notice that when I do amongst black people, I'm always getting a lot of hate from black people, particularly, who, man, why are you always talking about black people? You always talking about black folk. Man, you always got something to say about the sisters. Man, I can't believe you talking about a black woman. We supposed to be backing up our black woman. Well, I got a question for y'all. President Barack Obama mentioned that he will not be endorsing Kamala Harris, who's a black woman. Yeah, you heard that. President Biden is endorsing Kamala Harris as he drops out of the presidential race. He's not going to be the nominee. He endorses Kamala Harris, but Barack Obama and Michelle Obama both are not endorsing Kamala Harris, another black woman. So I'm going to want to see if y'all going to go over to their channel and everything like that and give them the same smoke you give me. How you not going to support a black woman? Black women are bliggy.
So this guy could be termed as a conspiracy theorist, possibly spreading rumors or something like that. Do you think he has a point? That why on earth is it that the white Americans have already endorsed her? Unfortunately, Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama have kept mute. What's your response, Professor Kelly?
Fine. So thank you for the question. So I would say a couple of different things. One is that the role of President Obama has been very interesting and somewhat complicated in this whole process. Some people have been somewhat critical of him for, on some ways, they're arguing undermining the democratic will of the people. President Biden went through this whole process and went through the primaries and won all the primaries, secured enough delegates. And so there, on the right, actually, there's a kind of an active conspiracy that at the end of the day, it'll be either Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton that will come up at the convention, and that'll be the candidate that goes forward. So that's more a conspiracy theory on the right. I would say if you read President Obama's statement, he was arguing for, and a number of other people were arguing for, a bit of a mini primary, an open convention, an open season, and people make their arguments, and then at the convention selected, and then from there move forward. I've not talked to President Obama. I mean, I interviewed him once 20 years ago when he was a state senator, but I've not talked to him, but I've read accounts that he feels he's in a position to unite the party and that there should be a process and not just an anointment of Vice President Harris. I will say that the Congressional Black Caucus, Hakeem Jeffries, Jim Clyburn, I mean, many, many prominent African-American politicians have endorsed Vice President Harris. So the role of President Obama is interesting. It's worthy of attention. Some people on both sides have been somewhat critical of it. And, at the end of the day, he needs to decide what he thinks is the best way to contribute and the role that he can play. So I hope that answers your question, that
It's tricky.
There's
it's
a number of different
thing.
people who think a lot of different things.
Very complex.
That's some of the what I've heard about.
I understand it's a very complex and tricky situation. Abdulaziz, we have about 5 minutes before Zoom kicks us out. So Abdulaziz, if I ask you this question, President Obama, former president of the United States of America, the 44th president of the US, Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, is seen as an influential figure in the party. Do you think if he delays his endorsement, that would affect Kamala Harris's candidacy?
No, I think, just as Prof. Kelly mentioned, it's important, people retain their principles. And I think this might be a matter of principle, whereas he's a Democrat, portraying himself as a true Democrat, and therefore wouldn't want to be part and parcel of a process that looks like an anointment. So I think it's, I don't think there's a lot of, there should be a lot of, back and forth over a lot of things mentioned. I think there should be just, people should just be calm a little bit and just wait for the process to solve itself. And then, we can know where President Obama stands in terms of this particular candidacy of Kamala Harris. So I think it's a matter of principle. That's what I will think. I've not talked to Barack Obama, but I think it looks like a matter of principle for him not to be part of an anointment process, just allowing the process to solve itself.
Right, of course. Yeah, Professor, let's be very brief. There is this issue of incumbency benefit, which, of course, it's a very important thing to look at in Nigeria and other African countries. You know what I mean? If to say that President A is leading an African country, say Nigeria, there is every possibility that the person he has anointed, could be the next president of the country. Does that happen in the US? And could it happen this time around that Joe Biden has endorsed Kamala Harris and they would sort of benefit from this kind of incumbency?
Yeah, no, it's definitely possible. And in some ways it speaks to the previous question, because President Biden previously was vice president for 2 terms under President Obama. And if you remember, President Obama was perceived to have basically bypassed President Biden and gone with then Senator Clinton, or Secretary of State Clinton, in 2016. There was some talk about President Biden's son had died, and so he's grieving and so on. So that is historically a pathway. Richard Nixon was vice president for 2 terms and then later became president. George H.W. Bush, the first George Bush president, he was vice president for 2 terms. He became president. Al Gore tried to get there. He got more votes in the popular vote, very controversial election in 2000. So it has been a pathway in the past. And certainly because the campaign was the Biden-Harris campaign, all of the resources, all of the money that President Biden raised, then Vice President Harris has access to. And that's a very significant, $100 million campaign apparatus, offices in states across the country. So there's those elements. I would just add one quick point on the previous topic, which is that President Obama also, in addition to having an idealistic side, he's a very pragmatic politician coming from Chicago, which is known for quite ruthless politics. So I think he did make some calculus of this may not happen, and so he publicly maintained a positive face toward President Biden, appeared in ads and fundraisers, but also I think there's some evidence that behind the scenes he was saying, we really will not get this. This is a critical election. We need to go in a different direction. But upon that happening, did not say, okay, let's go right away with Vice President Harris, held back, as Dr. Abdulaziz has very rightly pointed out and you asked about.
Let's split 1 minute to each of you and answer this question. Dr. Abdulaziz Tijani Bako, why is the world worried about the possible return of Donald Trump?
A lot of people have seen what happened in his previous presidency. I sincerely am not one of those who is worried about second presidency for Donald Trump. I think he has done his first presidency, and United States had its issues, and also I believe that he has learned a lot from his first presidency, first term, and I think there's also evidence to show that he has learned a lot in terms of being able to stay on course, to be focused on issues and matters that really are important. So I think even if in the scenario that he wins, I do not think that it will be a repeat of what happened in his first term. I think it will be a much more improved Donald Trump. Yeah. That's what I think.
Yeah, Dr. Abdulaziz is saying that we are going to see Trump 2.0. Professor Kelly, why is the world scared, worried, and anxious about the return of Donald Trump?
Well, no, thank you. And I respect Dr. Abdulaziz's opinion. I have kind of a different take, but I think in terms of a foreign policy point of view, he has a very isolationist, America first policy. So I know people are very worried in Europe about the Ukraine and what would happen there, the NATO support. I think there's concern about what would happen with China and Taiwan. I think there's concern about global warming. And more broadly, I think there's a real concern about the democratic fabric of the global community, both within the United States, but as you mentioned, the United States is still quite an influential country, so what that might mean for interactions with other people around the world. He did slash the State Department quite a bit, and if you look at Project 2025, I have a lot of critical things to say there. So I just want to be mindful of time, but those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor Jeff Kelly Lowenstein, and thank you very much indeed, Dr. Abdulaziz Tijani Bako.